The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a soft golden light across our small kitchen in Bristol. I had just finished preparing Ethan's favorite breakfast: scrambled eggs, grilled tomatoes, baked beans, and a slice of buttered toast. It was our little ritual every Saturday. I took care to plate everything just how he liked it, even adding a touch of paprika on top, the way he always asked. I turned around, smiling, expecting to see him entering the kitchen with his usual sleepy grin and a teasing comment about my bedhead. But instead, I saw him standing by the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Morning," I said, a bit hesitant. "Breakfast is ready." He didn't move. "We need to talk," Ethan finally said, his tone colder than I'd ever heard. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something wasn't right. "All right." I tried to keep my voice steady as I sat down at the small table. "What's going on?" He walked in, not touching the plate I'd made for him. "I don't think this is working anymore, Rachel." "Us." "This relationship." I stared at him, blinking. "What are you talking about?" He sighed and looked away. "I've been thinking about it for a while. You're not ambitious. You've settled for too little in life. You're always here, just cooking, cleaning. I need more." My stomach dropped. I felt like I was falling through the floor. "Is this a joke?" "I'm serious," he said. "You've stopped growing. I'm moving on." I couldn't breathe. I had just made him breakfast. I had loved him for 6 years. And now he was throwing it all away, standing in the kitchen like this was just another mundane conversation. "Is there someone else?" I asked quietly. He paused. That pause told me everything. I stood up, heart pounding. "Get out." Ethan didn't argue. He turned, walked away, and closed the front door behind him. I stood there in silence, staring at the untouched breakfast growing cold on the table. Something inside me broke, but another part of me, one that had been buried, began to stir. This wasn't going to be the end. Not for me. The hours after Ethan left felt like a blur. I sat on the edge of the bed, fully clothed, staring at nothing. The flat was too quiet. I could still hear his words echoing in my head. "You've stopped growing." As if love wasn't enough. As if the 6 years we had built together meant nothing. I didn't cry. Not then. There was a strange stillness inside me, like my body hadn't caught up with what had just happened. But as the sky outside darkened and the city lights flickered on, the weight of everything began to settle on my shoulders. I finally moved, wandering through the flat we had shared. I picked up his jumper from the back of the chair, the one I used to wear when I felt cold. His mug was still on the counter, next to the half-finished jar of coffee we always shared. Little things. Each one felt like a cut. I grabbed a bin bag and started clearing out his things. Methodically. His toothbrush. His shoes by the door. His razor. His books. I didn't hesitate, didn't pause. I was fueled by something deeper than sadness. Something sharper. Around midnight, I found myself outside, standing by the communal bins, the bag of his belongings slung over my shoulder. The cold night air bit at my skin, but I barely noticed. I dropped the bag inside, closed the lid, and turned to go back upstairs. As I reached the door, I saw my reflection in the glass, pale, tired, hollow-eyed. A version of myself I hardly recognized. And something in me snapped. I wasn't going to be that woman. The one left behind. The one discarded like old clothes. I walked into the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. My hair was limp. My face looked older than it had a week ago. I hadn't worn makeup in months. Not because I didn't care, but because no one seemed to notice anyway. But now I would do it for me. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a pair of scissors. My hands trembled as I stared at the ends of my hair. Then, with one clean motion, I cut the first strand. The strands of hair fell into the sink like threads of an old life unraveling. Snip, snip, snip. By the time I stopped, I barely recognized myself. My once long, soft waves now sat in a sharp bob just below my chin. Uneven. Impulsive. But free. I ran my fingers through the rough cut, letting the silence of the flat settle around me. Something had shifted. Not just in my appearance, but deep within. I wasn't sure what yet, but it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. The next morning, I didn't lie in bed scrolling through old messages or wondering where Ethan might be. I opened the windows wide, let the cold breeze in, and stripped the bed.
Clean sheets.
Fresh start. Then I looked around the flat. It was mine now. The lease was in my name. Every corner, every item, suddenly looked different. It wasn't a shared space anymore. It was my space. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I decided to repaint the living room. That afternoon, I stood in the aisle of a DIY shop, staring at shades of green and gray like they held the answers to everything. A soft sage, maybe. Something calm. Something new. Trying to fix heartbreak with paint. A voice beside me joked. I turned and saw a woman about my age, curly hair tied in a messy bun, paint splattered on her coat. I smiled faintly. Something like that. She reached for the same swatch I'd been holding. Sage is a good choice. Peaceful, but not boring. Thanks, I said. I've never painted a room before. Well, if you need help, I'm usually covered in paint by noon anyway. I'm Louisa. Amelia. We shook hands. It felt strangely significant, the first real human interaction since Ethan walked out. The first step out of the fog. Later that evening, I returned home with paint cans, rollers, and aching arms. I changed into old joggers, tied up what was left of my hair, and started covering the walls. With every brush stroke, I felt lighter. That night, curled up on the sofa with flecks of green on my cheek, I allowed myself to smile. Not because I was healed, but because I was finally beginning. It was almost midnight when I finally looked at myself again in the mirror. Not just a glance, not the quick, dismissive look I'd grown used to, but a real, lingering gaze. The woman looking back wasn't the one Ethan had known. She looked tired, yes, and a little lost. But there was something else in her eyes.
Steel.
A glint of quiet defiance. I reached up and touched my jaw, freshly bare with a new haircut. My lips curled slightly at the corners. Not a full smile, not yet, but something close. Over the next week, I gave myself small missions. Get up before 9. Make the bed. Leave the flat at least once. Eat something that didn't come from the microwave. I started walking more. Just around the block at first, then to the small bakery 2 streets down. The woman behind the counter began to remember my name. Her smile felt real. Louisa popped by twice with brushes and tips for finishing the corners of the living room. She spoke easily, never prying. I learned that she was a freelance illustrator, painted murals on nursery walls, and had once turned down a job designing menus for a chain restaurant because, in her words, it was soulless. Being around her was like breathing cleaner air. No judgment. No weight. One rainy afternoon, she invited me to her studio, a cramped but colorful space tucked above a florist's shop. Paintings leaned against every wall. Bright skies, laughing children, oversized teacups dancing across canvases. This one's for a cafe in Brighton, she said, gesturing to a cheerful beach scene. They wanted something to cheer up their customers in winter. I stared at the painting. It works. She looked at me. So, what do you do? The question caught me off guard. What did I do? I used to work in marketing, I said slowly. Freelance. But it's been a while. Ethan didn't think it was worth much. Louisa frowned. Sounds like Ethan was full of it. I laughed. Not politely. Not nervously. A real, loud, unfiltered laugh. And just like that, something cracked open. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been wound. How much of myself I'd been shrinking to fit into someone else's frame. Back at home, I dug out my old laptop. It was dusty and slow, but still full of unfinished projects, forgotten ideas, and one silly blog I'd started years ago about obscure teas. I read through old drafts, eyes wide. I used to write. I used to create. Before I let it all be labeled a hobby and shoved into a drawer. That night, I opened a new document and began typing. Words poured out, clumsy but eager. It didn't matter where they led. It only mattered that I'd started again. A month had passed since the day Ethan had walked out, and though the pain still lingered like smoke after fire, it no longer choked me. Instead, something else had started to grow in its place. I was up early that Friday, rain tapping gently at the window. I made a pot of proper coffee, not the instant rubbish Ethan used to insist was good enough. The rich aroma filled the kitchen as I typed away on my old laptop, working on a blog post about finding peace in small rituals. Halfway through a sentence, my phone buzzed. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, is this still Beatrice? I heard about what happened.
I'm sorry.
If you ever want to chat, I'm around." I stared at the screen. The name attached to the number was Clara James, Ethan's cousin. She and I had always got on during family holidays, though Ethan used to say she was a bit of a drifter. Clara had a way of making everyone feel seen, even when she barely knew them. I typed a short reply, polite but cautious. "Thanks, Clara. Appreciate it. Hope you're well." Within minutes, another message came. "There's a vintage fair in Camden this weekend. Bit of a distraction if you're up for it." I almost said no. But then I looked around the flat, quiet, still, unchanged, and I thought, why not? Camden was bustling on Saturday, the smell of incense and street food mingling in the air. Clara arrived in a bright yellow raincoat and a beanie decorated with badges. She greeted me like we'd seen each other last week. We wandered through stalls selling old records, battered books, odd jewelry, and hand-stitched dresses. Clara chatted to every seller, asked about their crafts, their stories. She was magnetic. I found a second-hand typewriter with chipped keys. Something about it tugged at me. "You should get it," Clara said. "Looks like it's got stories waiting inside." I smiled and bought it. Over coffee in a tucked-away cafe, she finally asked, "How are you?" Honestly. I took a breath. Some days I wake up angry. Some days I cry for no reason. But I'm starting to like being alone. It's quiet, but it's mine. Clara nodded, eyes soft.
Good.
Sometimes we need the silence to remember who we are. Later that evening, back at home, I placed the typewriter on the desk by the window. I didn't use it, not yet, but just having it there felt like a promise. That night, I lit a candle and wrote a short story about a woman who lost everything but learned to make tea leaves sing. No one would read it. That wasn't the point. The point was that I was still here. And maybe, just maybe, blooming again. Autumn settled in with a bite. The air was crisper, the light thinner, and the evenings arrived with a quiet finality. I began to notice things in the flat I hadn't before. The way the wooden floor creaked by the radiator, the soft hum of the neighbors' jazz music through the walls, and how the ivy on the windowsill had started to curl toward the light again. Something was shifting inside me, too. One evening, I received an email from a literary journal I had submitted to on a whim months ago. My short story, the one about the tea leaves, had been accepted. I stared at the message in disbelief, then laughed out loud, startling a pigeon outside my window. It wasn't a major journal, not the sort of thing people brag about at parties, but it meant something. Someone had read my words and wanted more. I told Clara over dinner at a Turkish place in Angel, and she nearly knocked over her wine glass in excitement. "That's brilliant," she beamed.
See?
"Told you that old typewriter had stories in it." She toasted me with her fork, and I felt it, that rare, honest warmth of being genuinely seen. The next week, I ran into Ethan. It was bound to happen eventually. London might be massive, but fate has a cruel sense of humor. I was browsing books at Hatchett's when I heard a familiar voice, low, smooth, practiced. I turned. He looked thinner.
Worn.
He was with someone. A woman, younger, with sharp eyeliner and a nervous smile. She clung to his arm like a child lost in a crowd. Our eyes met. He paused. "B," he said, as if startled. As if he had the right to be startled. I gave a small nod.
"Ethan."
He shifted awkwardly. "You look well."
I did.
I knew it. Not in the way he meant, but in a deeper, untouchable way. "Thanks," I said. "Hope you're doing all right." The girl glanced between us. He gave a tight smile.
Yeah.
Settling in.
I didn't ask where.
I didn't ask with whom.
I didn't ask anything.
Because I didn't need to know anymore. Later that night, I told Clara about the encounter. Did you feel anything? She asked. I thought about it. Like seeing an old photograph. Familiar, but flat. No weight to it. She nodded, understanding. You're further along than you think. Back home, I found myself rereading old journal entries from the dark days when I was certain I would vanish without him. The handwriting was erratic, the pain thick between the lines. I didn't cry. Instead, I picked up the typewriter and began a new story. This one was about a house haunted not by ghosts, but by echoes of a love that never really was. A house that, brick by brick, learned to sing again. The keys clacked like steady rain, and in the quiet, I finally heard my own voice. It was on an ordinary Tuesday when I received the invitation that would change everything. A cream-colored envelope slipped through the letterbox, heavy with formality. My name was written in perfect cursive, unfamiliar but intentional. Inside was a card, thick, embossed, and scented faintly of lavender. Mr. and Mrs. Greystone request the pleasure of your company for dinner at Ashfield House. Ashfield House. Clara's parents' place. I blinked at the gold lettering, uncertain how to respond. It wasn't Clara's handwriting. In fact, she hadn't mentioned anything about it. I rang her straight away. Did you know your parents invited me to dinner? There was a pause on the other end.
Ah, yes.
I was going to mention it. They asked about you, and I suppose I may have talked you up a bit too much. I laughed nervously. Why do I get the feeling this isn't just a dinner? Clara hesitated. They're curious about you. You've become a bit of a fixture in my life. They want to meet the mysterious bee who writes ghost stories and rescues stray furniture. A fixture. It struck me. I had been so consumed by rebuilding my life that I hadn't noticed I had become part of someone else's world too. Underscore 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 underscore. Ashfield House was every bit the grand country estate you'd expect from a family like the Greystones. A winding drive, tall hedges, and ivy crawling across honeystone walls. Inside, it was all oil paintings, antique rugs, and the faint scent of polish and roasted meat. Clara's mother, Lucinda, was poised and elegant, her hair swept into a chignon and her pearls sitting just right on her collarbone. Her father, Henry, was more jovial, pouring wine generously and making easy conversation about literature and travel. And then there was me, sat at their table, drinking their wine, wearing the nicest dress I owned, which still had a faint ink stain near the hem from the typewriter ribbon. Lucinda watched me carefully throughout dinner. Not unkindly, but with the same curiosity one might have for a book in an unfamiliar language. You're a writer, she said during dessert. What do you write? Short fiction mostly. Domestic themes. A bit of mystery.
Ah.
So, nothing frivolous. There was a sharpness to her words, but not malicious. Just precise. Clara reached for my hand beneath the table. After coffee, Henry offered a tour of the library. I trailed behind him, surrounded by first editions and ancient dust. He paused before a shelf lined with journals. My grandfather kept meticulous diaries. Everything that happened in this house, every visitor, every meal. I suppose he believed stories were worth preserving. I nodded. They are. His eyes met mine. So, what story will you tell about tonight? I gave a small smile. One with many layers. Underscore 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 underscore. On the drive back to London, Clara was quiet. Eventually she spoke. They like you, you know. I wasn't sure. They're just careful with people, especially people I care about. Something inside me fluttered,
Softly. Gently.
like the wings of something long asleep, slowly waking. As the city lights welcomed us home, I realized I hadn't once thought about Ethan the entire evening. I had been fully present, with Clara, in my new chapter. The weeks after the dinner passed with a kind of steady rhythm I hadn't known in years. Clara and I found ourselves woven into each other's days like threads in a tapestry. Quiet coffee mornings, long walks through Hampstead Heath, the odd afternoon in bookshops where we'd argue over covers and blurbs. Her laugh had become a sound I sought out instinctively. Her presence something I no longer second-guessed. But something had shifted. Beneath the comfort was an undercurrent of unease. Like the feeling you get when you know you've left a window open, but can't remember where. It started with the letter. A small white envelope pushed under my door. No address. No stamp. Inside, a torn newspaper clipping, an old society column photo of Ethan and me at a charity ball years ago. Written across it in thick black ink were the words, "People don't just disappear, Beatrice." My breath caught. My skin went cold. I stared at it for a long time before folding it and sliding it into the drawer under the kettle. I didn't tell Clara. But then came the second one. This time it was shoved through the letterbox at Clara's flat, addressed to her. Inside, a photocopy of an old property deed with my name on it, dated just before Ethan filed for divorce. Scrawled across the top in the same bold hand. "She's not who you think she is." Clara looked at me, her face unreadable. "What is this?" I reached for the paper, too quickly. "I don't know. Someone's playing games." She frowned, her fingers tightening around the envelope. "You're sure you don't recognize the handwriting?" I hesitated for half a second too long.
No.
"I've no idea." She didn't press further, but I saw it, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows across the tiles. I pulled out the first note, then the second. My hands trembled slightly. The style was familiar, almost theatrical. It was Ethan's lawyer's handwriting. I remembered seeing it on those endless divorce letters, the kind designed to drain you of will. But what was he trying to do now? Was he behind this? Or had I underestimated someone else entirely? Underscore 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 underscore. The next day, as I stepped out of the tube at Holborn, I felt it again. That sensation that someone was watching. Not the vague unease of city crowds, but a focused, pressing stare. I turned quickly. No one familiar. But across the street, under a scaffold, stood a man in a long coat, his face obscured by a paper he wasn't reading. I kept walking, heart pounding. At work, I couldn't focus. Words blurred. Deadlines slipped. I barely noticed when Linda asked if I was all right. I nodded too quickly and locked myself in the office loo to breathe. I couldn't tell Clara. Not yet. Not when things had finally started to feel real. But I knew I had to do something. Underscore 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 underscore. That evening, I dug through my old files and found the last solicitor's letter from the divorce. Sure enough, the scrawl on the envelope matched. Slanted and arrogant. But the lawyer had left practice years ago. So who had these? And more importantly, why now? I stared out the window. Rain streaked the glass like tear tracks. London below buzzed, oblivious. Then my phone lit up. A message from an unknown number. Truth always finds its way home. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't over. And someone was coming for me. It was nearly midnight when I heard the knock. 3 sharp raps against the wood of my flat's front door. Not frantic, not urgent, but deliberate. Controlled. I paused, barefoot in the kitchen with a mug of half-drunk tea, heart suddenly hammering. The city outside was quiet, softened by the drizzle that had started an hour ago. I hadn't buzzed anyone in. Slowly, I approached. "Who is it?" My voice came out thinner than I'd intended. No answer. I looked through the peephole. No one. The corridor was empty, but on the floor lay a small black box. I opened the door with caution, grabbed it, and slammed the door shut again. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a flash drive. No note. No label. I stared at it frozen. Then I shoved it in a drawer beneath the toaster and walked away. Whatever it was, it could wait till morning. I couldn't face another ghost tonight. By midday, I gave in. I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened the only file inside, a video. The screen flickered, then showed grainy CCTV footage.
A man.
Late 40s. Sharp suit. Ethan. He was standing in a hotel lobby, speaking with a woman whose back was to the camera. Then another angle, the two of them entering a lift. She turned briefly. Clara. I stared, unable to move. It was dated 3 months before I'd ever met Clara. My thoughts spiraled. Had they known each other before? Why hadn't she told me? The next clip was worse. Ethan. Arguing with someone off-screen. His voice raised, then suddenly cut off. The footage ended. No timestamp. No context. I sat there for a long time, the silence deafening. Everything suddenly felt brittle. Underscore 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 underscore. Clara came over that evening with wine and Thai takeaway, chatting cheerfully as she kicked off her boots. I tried to smile, to match her mood, but the box was still on the counter, and I couldn't look at it without feeling sick. She noticed. "You're quiet." "I've had a weird day," I said, trying to keep my tone even. She nodded slowly, eyes searching mine. "Is it the notes again?"
No.
"Something else." I didn't elaborate. She didn't push. But the air between us had changed. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, I went to the solicitor's office where Ethan's divorce papers had originated. I hadn't been there since everything ended. The secretary recognized me. Her lips thinned. "He doesn't work here anymore. Retired. Moved abroad, I believe." I nodded. "Do you know if he left anything? A file, maybe?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing that wasn't collected by his client." "His client?" I froze. "Ethan?" "No," she said, looking puzzled. "A woman. Picked it up